Hi, and welcome back to Beyond the Fine Print, where we uncover the human stories behind compliance, risk, regulation, and responsible innovation. I'm your host, Remy Rosen, VP Marketing and AI Evangelist at Sedric. Today, I'm joined by Annie Delgado, Chief Risk Officer at Upstart, a leading AI-powered lending platform that partners with banks and credit unions to expand access to affordable credit while managing risk more effectively, enabling a system that is dramatically more efficient and more accurate for both borrowers and lenders. Annie has spent her career at the intersection of compliance, technology, and consumer protection, and she's played a pivotal role in shaping how fintechs can scale responsibly. She leads Upstart's compliance strategy with a particular focus on understanding and managing regulatory risks associated with the use of non-traditional credit modeling techniques, underwriting valuables, and fostering a culture of compliance, consumer protection, and innovation through hands-on engagement with Upstart colleagues, bank partners, and regulators. In today's conversation, we'll discuss tech-enabled compliance and explore how Annie has built a data-driven risk program at scale. We'll dive into how regulators are adapting to the age of AI and what the future of compliance leadership looks like in fintech. Annie, welcome to Beyond the Fine Print.
Thanks for having me. So good to see you this morning.
Thank you so much. Let's start with your personal journey. What first drew you into compliance, and what kept you passionate about this field as the industry has evolved?
Well, as a lot of people, I think my age got into compliance somewhat accidentally. It wasn't something that was very sort of well known to me when I was, going through college and sort of thinking about what my career journey might be. But when I first sort of entered the workforce, it was right around the time of the financial crisis. And I actually landed my first job at a mortgage bank. And I just found myself very interested by all of the things that were going on in the news, and that being at the intersection of the things I was learning at the mortgage bank, and sort of thinking about how much of it was just driven by consumers not really understanding the product that they were getting into. And I think the rhetoric in the news was, about the big bad lenders that were sort of causing this. But as I was getting to know a lot of people in this industry, I realized, well, there's a lot of confusion on their end as well, right? Because there's so much complexity to this industry. So I was actually really encouraged and interested when GFE 2010 came out, and there was this attempt to sort of streamline the disclosure process and make it more clear for people. But even with that, there was still just so many questions about how this whole thing works. And so I think I just kind of consistently found myself drawn to sort of the work that the regulators were doing to sort of understand consumer perception of different types of products, how they might understand different disclosures. And even though I didn't at that time work directly in compliance, I always just was interested in knowing what was going on in that space. And so that was really how I sort of got into it. And then the second part of your question about staying in it, I think the great thing about working in compliance is it's like an ever evolving and changing landscape. All of the sort of complexity of technology, the complexity of different innovative products that companies are coming out with, and how that sort of intersects with some of our longstanding rules and traditions and expectations is something that I just think there's literally never a dull moment. And so if you are, interested in problem solving, and you're interested in human communication, and you're interested in, making sure that consumers are cared for in this incredibly important part of their lives, right? Their financial picture, then this is a great industry for you to work in, a good field.
I love that. And thank you for already bringing the human side of compliance from the beginning. Was there a pivotal moment where it defined your career and your vision for how you want to treat compliance?
Yeah, I think, there's probably a couple of different answers to that. The first one, when I was in my first management role in mortgage, this was, many moons ago, and I was in my first sort of supervisory type of role, I realized that there was this one particular thing that was happening where, because teams weren't talking to each other, the same bit of information was actually getting checked 4 different times before the loan closed. And I was like, wow, this is incredibly inefficient, and there's got to be a better way to do this. And so that was sort of my first intrigue to what else is out there, right? Like what other things can we automate or just efficiencies can we make just by having people talk to each other and really understand the nuts and bolts of how the underlying technology is working so that we can get faster for our customers. And so I think that was sort of one pivotal moment for me of just realizing how much sort of waste there is in the system that's just caused by either a lack of understanding of the technology or a lack of human communication of people talking to the person upstream and downstream of them. And so I really, that was when I first sort of became passionate about the sort of data-driven approach to risk management. And then I think the other real pivotal thing in my career that has had a big impact on me is the work that we did with Upstart and the CFPB when we applied for our no action letter way back in 2016. Up until that time, I think a lot of the rhetoric and the communication that I had heard about regulators was to fear them. And, I had just started at Upstart when we first sort of engaged with the CFPB, and the Upstart leadership, our CEO, Dave, he really took a more of a human collaborative approach and, said, instead of fearing them, why don't we just go have a meeting with them, explain what we want to do and get their input and work collaboratively. And I had never really considered this as an option before, but it had a big impact on me and something that really I've taken forward into every sort of decision that we have moving forward at Upstart is to think about, what kind of communication do we need to do with the regulators? Do we need their input? Do we need to educate them? Do we need to, bring them along in this journey or have them give us some feedback and really try to have more of a collaborative approach? And that's been another big defining moment for me.
Oh, wow. I love that philosophy to work together with them as opposed to see them as an opposing force. No, that's so good. And if we talk about that, usually people see regulation as a restrictive force and not as a driver of growth. But with technology and what you've been doing at Upstart, you've managed to turn it into an actual growth driver. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, I think, there's all kinds of different analogies that people use to talk about compliance, and it's all in how you look at it. So you hear sometimes people are like, oh, compliance is the stop sign or the roadblock or all of this type of stuff. But actually, you should think of compliance more like being, one analogy I heard one time is the brakes on the car. And the brakes on the car isn't the thing that uses you to stop. It's the thing that actually helps you to go fast because it's a backstop that is there for you so that you can move fast, right? So if you were driving in a car with no brakes, you're going to drive a whole lot slower and a whole lot more cautious than if you're driving with a car that has, best in class brakes. I'm not a big car person, so I can't tell you what best in class brakes actually are. But that's really how you should think of them, is that compliance function is your control that should hopefully be working in the background, not to slow you down, but something that is there that's going to keep you safe so that if you get over your skis, it can step in. I think that where compliance functions sometimes go wrong is when those brakes are constantly in over test mode, right? And not for appropriate situations. And then it can be perceived as a blocker for, whatever the product development team or growth team or marketing team wants to do. But if it's really something that you can automate and have working in the background, then it's strictly a value add for the business teams.
Oh, that's excellent. And that's our perfect segue to actually building the program. So let's move on to building a data-driven compliance program. When you set out to modernize compliance at Upstart, what were the foundational steps in moving from manual processes to more of a technology-first program?
Yeah, so the first step, I think, in anything that you do should be data, right? Get some numbers, put some numbers to things. When you have a good set of data, you can take a really risk-based approach to what you're doing. So very early on, in any sort of product development lifecycle, me or my staff will sit down and sort of really outline what are all of the risks that could possibly happen here, and then assign quantitative probabilities to what that looks like. Are they really high risk issues? Are they expensive issues? What is the actual thing we're trying to mitigate here? So you can focus your resources. I think a lot of times in companies, or with people I've chatted with, their risk management is geared towards fix whatever the last thing that went wrong is, as deeply as you possibly can. And I don't really agree with that approach, because just because it went wrong one time, it might be like a strike by lightning event and it's never going to happen again. And so really, belt and suspenders, every control over that issue might not be the right approach. In some cases it is, if it's really a high risk thing. But if it was really just a fluke, then that might not be the right approach. And you never want to wait until something's actually gone wrong to be fixing it. The whole idea is preventative, right? You want to prevent those risks from happening in the first place. And I don't know how else you do that other than with data, because mostly compliance teams are not the luxuriously staffed, tons of people available at all times to look at everything. So you really have to use data to decide where to focus your resources.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And, to be a data-driven company is worth its weight in gold, especially when you have really good data that you can lean on. I'm going to steal your analogy, by the way, about the car and the brakes, because if your brakes aren't good, then you can't stop the car and you're obviously going to drive really slowly. So
that's right. Yeah.
That's excellent.
Evangelize it. Use it. I think it's a good one.
I will give you credit, though, for you said it. I love it.
Well, actually, credit goes to somebody said it one time in an interview. I was interviewing a candidate and they used it. And I thought, I love that. I'm going to steal it. So
that's brilliant. Usually I say safety net, and I just feel like that's so overused. And we're not all in the circus anyway, so safety net isn't that great. So I love it with brakes on cars. Tell me, when you're automating processes and you're leaning on technology, when do you rely more on human judgment, and when is compliance okay to be automated or AI driven?
I think in all situations, it's a both and. So the great thing about automation is that you can take an old process and you can make it better, right? So for instance, back in the day with call monitoring, you would take all of the calls that you would, have on the table, and you would just pick a random sample, and then you would have someone listen to those calls. And it's kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack. You know that not all of the calls had a perfect score, but you don't know which ones to actually look at. So that was a very expensive process without a lot of ROI there. With automation, you can use things like call scrubbing technology that you can write a rule set around, and the rule set will then score the calls based on the different risks that you're looking for, so that the things that get escalated for human reviews are the ones that the automated system thinks there's a problem with, so that that human review is actually used to make something better, as opposed to just check a box that you listened to it. So I think that that is really where the power of automation comes in, is in a collaboration between an automated system and a human. I think the other thing is that we need to be rethinking some of our jobs as human workers, to think of us more as overseers and calibrators of whatever the automation system is, right? So you have a system that's going to be checking for something, and then part of the human compliance job is to make sure that that system stays calibrated with the real risks of the world, right? Because no system is ever going to be set it and forget it. Software has bugs. Things change, rules change. And so part of our job as compliance people in the future is going to be really to oversee those automated systems and make sure that they're keeping pace with whatever the needs of the company might be.
That's excellent. I also love how Upstart, you said back in the day, we used to do manual sampling. A lot of businesses in the world, financial institutions that we work with, they came to us doing manual sampling in 2025. So you guys are way ahead of most people.
Yeah, manual sampling. It used to be the gold standard. It's not anymore.
No, it's just not tenable. Also, it's just such better quality when you can get 100% of calls sampled. Then the data is just so much richer than like a small sample that you can't really work with.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, this is a, random segue, but a lot of people are nervous to lean into that type of approach, because they think, I've had a quality score of 98% as long as I've been doing this manual sampling. And now that I've introduced the automated sampling, my quality score is going to go down. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you're actually finding the problems, right, which is the whole purpose of what you're doing in the first place. So you shouldn't be afraid of a change in the score. You should be glad that you actually are getting richer insights from the work that you're doing, and you're now providing a different level of value from your compliance program relative to when you were just manually kind of checking things off.
Yeah, I think that's the best business use case for why to use AI and not just like a small sampling. Even though I get it, managers might be afraid that, they weren't as good. And now that it's much more precise and accurate a measurement, it's going to reveal some uncomfortable truths, which can improve them.
That's right.
Yeah. Is human oversight still meaningful without compromising consistency or fairness? How do you work with that? Any ethical considerations?
Yeah, I mean, I think human oversight is definitely still meaningful. I think that in the absence of rules, right? So if something is not black or white, that you can say, hey, automated system, AI system, here's the good and here's the bad. If it becomes more subjective and you have to have the humans involved, the biggest thing that I would give as advice for people is to have that human involvement be well-rounded, be more committee-based, right? So as an example, at Upstart, we have a fair lending committee. And so we have a number of rules that we've established over the years of like, this is a good score, this is a bad score, this is a pass, this is a fail, and so on and so forth. But if we encounter an issue or a anomaly that doesn't fit within that rule set, and we either have to make a judgment call on whatever the situation is or refine the rule set, that decision is made by a diverse set of stakeholders with different sets of expertise. And I think that is the key, is making sure that you have diverse viewpoints at the table when you're doing high stakes decision making, especially when the decision making is going to inform a future automation event that is going to be, it's not like you make the decision one time and it's over. It's going to be used to sort of train a model over time. So having a lot of voices at the table so you have rich debate is important. Now, not every company has that many voices at the table because maybe they're a smaller shop, or maybe, all kinds of reasons. This is actually also a very great use case for AI, because in some of the different LLM technologies, you can literally train people to have a point of view and then debate with you on that topic. So maybe you don't have a colleague that you can debate with, but you can actually make an AI to debate with you on the topic to really flesh out the decision making about whatever you're going to do. So lots of conversation and thought, I think, is really the important things for humans to be thinking about as they're making those judgment calls.
Yeah, that's such a great tip for smaller shops to use the LLM to base on that. I mean, lending has had such a history of bias going back, and then committee is a wonderful way to solve that. Even if sometimes there's no way to go around it, inherent bias baked into an AI. So from past history. So committee is a wonderful suggestion. Let's move on to industry trends and future proofing. What are some of the biggest challenges compliance and risk teams are facing today to keep in pace with rapid fintech innovation?
I think one of the biggest challenges is, fintech, obviously financial technology, and there's this regulatory piece that's been around forever. And we're at this very challenging moment where it's just literally impossible for the regulation to keep up with the pace of the technology. The technology is changing so fast. And so, 10 years, 20 years ago, it might have been possible to be an expert in the regulation and be able to keep pace with all of the product innovation at your company based on that expertise. Now you almost have to be ahead of the regulation. So you have to not just be thinking about the regulation that exists today, but you have to be thinking about where it might be going in the context of whatever is being developed. An example of this in my career has been about explainability. So when we first started building our credit model with Upstart, we started with a few set of variables, and over time expanded the set of variables and expanded the sort of credit modeling techniques that were in use. And it would have been sort of easier traditional to just keep using the model form for decline reasons. But there was some point probably around 2017, early in 2017, that we were like, this model form, there's no way that this is an adequate explanation for the customer of why they might have been declined. We need to develop something different, which is, of course, a scary thing for people because everybody loves the model forms and like the model forms should be safe harbor. But I think we were able to see these might have been safe harbor in the past. They won't be safe harbor in the future because they're actually this is a tool that's not up to the task of what actually needs to be done to meet the spirit of the reg here. And so we developed an alternative approach. And then, time progresses. And of course, the CFPB later came out and said, the model forms aren't going to cut it, which we were really glad. We knew that 3 years ago, and we're sort of thinking about how to solve that problem. But I do think that this is a challenge for compliance and risk people today, is that adhering to the sort of approach that's always been done in the industry isn't going to be enough. If you are really pushing the needle on the tech side, you have to be thinking about what's coming down the pipeline from a regulatory perspective, which really means thinking about customer first of, okay, the point of the regulation is to protect the consumer. What would actually do that in this situation, right? It might not be the same set of tools that everybody's been using for the past 10, 20, 30 years. It might be something different, and you're going to help guide that.
Yeah, let's talk about the spirit of the reg. So as everyone knows, the CFPB has been defanged. State regulators are saying they're stepping in to fill the gaps. Does that mean we're looking at 50 different regulations? And how do you deal with that? How would you future-proof your company from a technology perspective, cultural perspective? Do you have to build relationships with 50 different regulators? What are your thoughts there?
That's a hard question. I think reality is developing a relationship with 50 different regulators is going to be a challenge. But I think that really you need to think about what is the sort of first principles approach that I would feel comfortable defending to anyone, right? And lead from there. So as an example with AI, before, I guess in 2024, Biden had put out this AI Bill of Rights. I thought that was a really good framework for things to think about. Trump later, took it away and replaced it with something different. But if you're using AI and you're looking for a starting point of here's a framework of things I should be thinking about, that's a good blueprint for you to think about them. And then, like I said, come up with a risk management approach and a point of view that you'd be comfortable defending to any sort of body. And that way, if somebody, the worst case scenario with a regulator is somebody comes in, asks a question, and you're like, well, I haven't thought about that. That's never the right answer. So think about it and make sure that you're going to be comfortable to have that conversation. I think that's really the approach that we have to take. And, the CFPB getting defanged or whatever it might be, there's always going to be a shift. And it's always interesting when people in the federal level are saying, okay, we're going to relax regulation. We never relax regulation. We just move it. We just move it from federal to state, and then we move it back and we move it back. So anybody who's thinking like, ooh, I can take a break, no, you can't take a break. So it's just a question of who you're talking to.
Yeah, it's going to be a bumpy road ahead. And, it could all be short-term changes and moving back and forth. And like you said, you still have to have that responsibility. Back to that, balancing innovation and regulation is tricky. We talked about this a little bit before, but how have you approached building effective communication bridges between Upstart and regulators around AI fairness and responsible models, especially when the technology could be made way ahead of the existing rules, and it might take them a long time to catch up?
Yeah, I think the big thing, again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but data is the point, because I think there is a lot of discussion, particularly in regulatory circles, about the risks of AI. That discussion is important to have, but it's missing the purpose of what is the opportunity with AI, right? Or any of the sort of technology advancements that we've had. There's always going to be risks, but rarely are these things just like innovation for innovation's sake. There's actually real opportunity to solve real problems for a lot of people with these technologies. And so bringing that data to show, here's the opportunity of what I think I can solve, and here is my plan about how I plan to mitigate the risks. And again, it's not that I'm blind about the risks. I've really thought about them and looked at them head on. And here's my plan. I think that is the piece. And the thing about regulators is they're humans and they also want to solve problems. They also want to protect consumers. And so it's not like they're these scary, unreasonable people. They actually are interested in learning about what's going on. They're interested in that modernization. They're interested in companies that are innovating responsibly. And so engaging in that dialogue is really important. Hiding from it is not really going to be a winning strategy, I don't think.
Yeah, that's great. Let's keep talking about building relationships, and we can pivot to internally. A lot of times internally at organizations, and you touched on this before, product, marketing, see compliance kind of as a pain. How do you pivot that? How do you become a strategic partner instead of seeing as a roadblock?
Yeah. A lot of times people will ask, what's the most important tool you have for compliance, or most important tool you use? And I used to joke, my most important tool is my relationships with the product managers. Yeah. Because actually the thing that makes me most effective is the fact that they are willing to call me into the room early. And so much of that is built from and enabled by your ability to solve problems for them kind of early on. So, because then they invite you back to the table and they realize, oh, this person is a strategic partner in helping me solve some of these problems. So I actually want them there when I'm doing the ideation stage, so that they can help me sort of see those pitfalls. And I think a lot of that is just how you approach the conversation, right? If you approach the conversation as a, wet blanket, like everybody likes to joke about how that's kind of how a lot of compliance people are, is just like the voice of no, then, that's not going to get you an invitation back to the, product development cycle. So I think really looking for how can I enable win-win solutions? How can I be not saying no, but saying, have we thought about this? Have we thought about this? How are we managing this part? And, showing a lot of curiosity, asking a lot of questions, I think is a big part of it.
That's excellent. So now I'm going to ask you a piece of advice for fellow compliance leaders who are listening. As everything becomes more technologically advanced, what skills or mindsets do technology leaders need to learn so they could sit in the room and really add value to the conversations with marketing leaders or product leaders?
I think one thing is just really engage with the technology. I think a lot of compliance people, I hear them constantly throwing shade at themselves, where they'll say like, well, I'm not the expert in this, I'm not this. And they use it as a way to sort of like hedge whatever they're about to say. And so when I see that, I'm like, okay, well, why don't you go become the expert? Go read about it, go research it, so that when you come to the table, you feel a lot more confident having that conversation, and you don't feel like you're flying blind because you're missing some really valuable insight that, only the product team has and you don't. And you don't have to be a software engineer to gain that insight, right? You just have to kind of like bang around with tools and do some reading on the internet and, do the things that are going to help prepare you so that you don't feel, like you're at a disadvantage in those conversations. And so I think that's one thing that compliance people really need to embrace is don't think of yourself as the like non-techie person in the room. Go and get the education that you need to help you feel confident and help you feel just empowered in the conversations so that you can sort of keep pace with what's going on. And I think a lot of that also just comes from testing. I think, sometimes people get to a certain level in their career and they think, well, I'm not going to get my hands dirty anymore. Guess what? Your hands should always be dirty. If you're a compliance person, you should constantly be trying to like poke at things, pull things, push things, like see what happens when that button gets pushed, because then you become this sort of power user, super user of whatever the system is. And it's hard not to feel educated if you really have used it and gotten your hands dirty in that way.
That's excellent. Annie, that's all the time we have for today. This was excellent insights. Thank you so much. And I hope to have you again soon.
All right. Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.